Joining us this hour is a very well-known farmer and farming educator, Joel Salatin, whose 500-acre polyface farm was prominently featured in the 2006 Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, as well as in the documentaries you may have seen called Food, Inc. and Fresh. He has authored 9 books, including You Can Farm and Salad Bar Beef, and the Center Street release in 2011 that I was reading over the weekend, Folks, This Ain't Normal. Called a polyface farmer, which we'll find out about, Joel was introduced to us by Acres USA publisher Fred Walters, whose father Charlie and I used to share the airwaves together. Joel is a regular contributor to their excellent magazine Acres USA, as well as for the Stockman Grass Farmer and Mother Earth News, focused as our most smart-thinking people we interview in the food business. He is focused on decentralizing the food system and encouraging local farms and local consumers to buy and produce food locally. To that end, Salatin has proven it works. He raises livestock using holistic management methods of animal husbandry, free of harmful chemicals, and meat from the farm is sold by direct marketing to consumers in restaurant. Logically, it is becoming the best strategy for sustainable, regenerative, and lower-costing food production, land enrichment, and ecological balance for all. Thank you so much for joining us, Joel.
Thank you, Zohara. It's great to be with you.
I love that you call yourself, I have to just read the quote, a Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. And does that leave any major theme out?
Well, I hope not. The whole idea is to break down some of these stereotypes and encourage discussion rather than the hardening of the categories.
Exactly. So tell us first to begin with, what does it mean when you say you're a polyface farm?
Well, we pick poly. It's, of course, the Greek prefix or the Latin prefix for many, polygons, polysided, poly everything. And so polyfaces is a farm of many faces. And we knew that we would have a lot of species, plants and animals, a lot of enterprises. And frankly, we always envisioned a farm with a lot of people faces, repopulating the countryside. So we had a lot of aspects to faces.
Some people, when they hear about your extraordinary accomplishment, 550-acre farm, you've built it into a $2-some million business. It's extraordinary. You grew up on a farm. How the way you grew up not only affect your decision to continue, but how did you alter what you learned to what you do today?
Well, the beautiful thing is that my dad was a genius. How the older you get, the smarter your parents were.
You're right, exactly.
and so we said, he was organic before Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. And actually, his father, my grandfather, was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine in 1949. And so my grandfather had this. He had compost piles. He had an octagonal chicken coop, and the chickens ran through the garden. He patented the very first walking garden sprinkler, that rolls up a garden hose as it walks through.
Yeah.
And he had this wonderful, my earliest childhood memories of going up there to his place, he had a huge, probably, a quarter-acre garden, which is a really big garden, and it was surrounded on 2 sides with T-trellis grapevines, Concord grapes. And being a child, they would hang down. I could just jump up and reach these dripping grapes, and just this sense of abundance, just being nested in abundance. The older I've gotten, the more I've realized how subconsciously that was affecting my idea of life, to be able to walk out a back door and just be enveloped in abundance. And so when we came, Mom and Dad bought this farm in 1961, worked off the farm, the town job to pay for it. And so, by the time I was out of high school and looking, I loved the farm, and from my earliest, memories, wanted to be here, but we couldn't figure out how to make the money work. You know how that goes.
Yeah.
And how do you make this thing work? And so we always milked a couple of Guernsey cows, and Dad was an accountant and a trained economist, and he realized very early on that you couldn't do the chemical approach and the off-farm input whatever I call it a sophisticated agriculture drug addiction. You had to rely on solar energy. You had to have higher margins by direct marketing, and he got all this. So I had this wonderful foundation, and so when it came time for me to kind of make these decisions, I just basically took Dad's philosophy that he hadn't been able to do because of having to pay for the farm and losing a farm in Venezuela and starting over later in life and all that.
Right.
And so Teresa and I were able to get this piece of raw land with an excellent, ecological, economic philosophy behind us, and then, and run. So I stand on shoulders of great people.
That's a beautiful legacy. And as you point out, you have 4 generations living on your farm now.
Yes, my mom is still a very active, she'll be 93 in December. She still drives, dances, sings, and if you go shopping with her, prepare to be exhausted.
How interesting. It's lovely. One of the things that your book covers so many areas, and we won't be able to cover them all, but maybe some of the bigger chunks. And one of them, of course, that you're so right to talk about is the increasing regulatory approach that's taken by the U.S. government towards farming and how much it is getting in the way of not only creativity but opportunity.
Well, yes, and the part of that story is as I was saying, through high school, we sold at a curb market, which was a precursor to today's farmers markets. There was one here in Stanton. It was started during the Depression, and in its heyday, it had like 60 vendors because farmers were food rich but cash poor.
Right.
And of course, the city needed food, and so this curb market was started in the Depression era, and to provide a venue for farmers to direct market. And we had a thriving one. Well, by the time I came along as a young teenager in the late 60s, it had dwindled down to 2 elderly matrons, but it was still functioning. One of them did bakery, baked goods, pastries, and the other one was a more kind of what we'd call an old-style, resilient, farmstead, a big garden, cured hams and that sort of thing. And then I came on. I had my chickens and eggs and things. That was the main thing. And then I added a garden later. And then we actually were able to dress beef in the field dressed beef, and sell big round steaks. And we had these 2 Guernsey milk cows. We could sell everything but raw milk. So we made cottage cheese, butter, buttermilk, all these things. And so my first farm plan was to just milk 10 cows. I was strong. I enjoyed it. I could milk 10 cows by hand and sell the milk to neighbors at supermarket prices. This is early 70s. Okay, This is before organics. I mean, we're still in Vietnam, right?
Right.
And so I said, well, I don't mind milking 10 cows. It'd take a couple hours. I could do that and just sell the milk to neighbors that were buying my eggs at the time. There was only one problem. It was illegal. And I've never gotten over it. I don't dwell on it every night, but I've never gotten over the fact that this regulatory climate not only kept my neighbors from enjoying much better milk, it kept me from being able to get back to the farm as soon as I wanted to, and kept our entire farm, land healing process from occurring as early as it could have. And that same hurdle, that same story, can be repeated, all over the world by the hundreds of thousands of farmers, entrepreneurs, ready to access their community with kefir, with pot pies, with all sorts of value-added product, because the single biggest growth area right now in the food movement is high-quality convenience.
Right.
30 years ago, we pioneers, we hoped that by now everybody would be in their kitchens and would learn how to cut up a chicken and cook parsnips and be canning, dehydrating, and fruit leathering and whatever. Well, as it turns out, yeah, some have, but by and large, that next leap past connecting to your local food has not happened.
Mm-hmm.
And the next leap is, well, around here we joke, the farm is polyface. We say what people really want is polyface Hot Pockets.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's very true. Even at the high end of the culinary art scene, there's these discussions of high end, very high end, like dining menus, seated menus, carry out. And so it is interesting. I want to come back for a moment, though, to cows, because this is a topic I've discussed over the decades from all different angles with all different people. Some people say we can't eat meat. We have to stop eating meat. We're destroying, the topsoil because of the cows. The cows are producing too much methane. And I read in your book that you said methane, folks, ain't coming from the cows. You said it's hardly on a scale of anything meaningful in comparison to the methane from the world's wetlands. I guess I'm ignorant. I have never heard somebody claim this to this degree, Joel. So tell us about it.
Well, the truth is that when material decays in an anaerobic environment, anaerobic being, of course, without oxygen, when biomass decays in an anaerobic environment, it does give off methane. And vegetation gives off the same methane whether it decomposes in the digestive tract of a cow or whether it decomposes in a swamp or decomposes through an earthworm. And so the beauty is, of course, that plants inhale methane. That's this is not a one-sided, a one-direction deal.
Right.
It goes both directions. And so the plants inhale all these gases, and that's part of the plant cycle. And so the world's wetlands, actually, the swamps and the wetlands, actually generate some 90%, I think, is the figure that's most common.
Wow.
Of the methane, of the planetary methane produced. And of course, they also ingest a lot of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when people talk about cows destroying the planet and all this, with methane, the cows are just a minuscule part of the methane produced. Most of it is coming from actually anaerobically decaying marshes and wetlands, and all the cattails and the willows and the prolific bulrushes growing in those areas.
Well, has the wetlands increased? I mean, because of the style of monoculture, agriculture, runoff, etc.?
No. Wetlands have actually decreased in many areas, and that's one of the reasons why we have all sorts of policies right now in the U.S. to preserve wetlands and not, many of them have been drained.
Right.
And so, we actually have a lot fewer wetlands than we have. The thing you have to understand about this whole atmospheric carbon discussion, from carbon dioxide to methane to whatever,
right?
The whole
carbon sequestration issue.
You have to understand is that the single biggest thing that drives that forward is when carbon moves out of the soil into the atmosphere. 500 years ago, the United States averaged over 8% organic matter in its soil. Today, we average 1% or less.
Wow.
When you add up the number of gigatons, the millions of these tons of carbon that moved out of the soil into the atmosphere, it's amazing. Australia, in 1820, averaged almost 20% organic matter. Today, Australia averages less than 1%. Mm-hmm. This has happened all over the world, especially where tillage, planting annuals, has become the modus operandi.
Yeah.
And so how we build soil, how nature builds soil, and the reason the healthiest soils on the planet are in these places is with perennial grasses, which are more efficient at converting solar energy into biomass than trees or bushes and shrubs, grasses. So you have herbivores and of course, both two-legged and four-legged predation to move them around, as well as seasons and dry seasons and warm seasons, cold seasons and hot seasons, fly cycles, all that sort of thing. There's a migratory choreography, as we know, in these primitive herds. But what we have done is we have taken the herbivore out of its historical ecological niche as a pruner, as an encourager of new growth. We've taken it out of that and segregated rather than integrated. So we've locked the herbivore into a feedlot, fed it annual grains that require tillage and chemicals to grow. I mean, it doesn't require chemicals, but that's what's normally done.
Right.
Yes, yes. And so we've taken this beautiful symbiotic choreography, and we've segregated it into a degenerative.
Yeah.
We've broken that symbiotic cycle, and neither side wins instead of both sides winning.
Yeah, exactly. Another guest of ours, in fact, later in the program, is Mark Shepard, who I know you know, who's written this beautiful work called Restoration Agriculture.
Sure.
And as another Acres USA wonderment, he'll talk some about that when we move to this annual seed culture and away from the perennials, that no civilization who has done that has ever survived. And, I feel like I'm really stupid tonight. It's like I've learned so much, and it's like I have literally been part of the, the ecological, back to the earth, organic, integrative systems for all my life. As an advocate primarily, though I do have a small organic garden of my own to really sort of learn what it takes. That was how I started. The question was, what would it take to feed ourselves? And I discovered a lot of work. And chickens that we could protect from the fox somehow. But he's going to also further that discussion. We need to take a break, and then we'll come back and talk some more about not only, as you point out, the herbivores like the cattle, but the bison, the buffalo, did this for thousands of years on our continent. And when we went about massacring the buffalo as a method of genocide of the red man, so to speak, we really began the whole awful cycle of not only monoculture planting, which the government supports, but also destroying our topsoil nationwide. If you're just joining us, Joel Salatin is with us. He is a polyface farmer. He's written many, many books. He also teaches this beautiful thing called the Salatin Semester. Go to www.salatin, Salatin semester.com, and www.polyfacefarms.com, and of course, acresusa.com.
Hi, this is Stephanie C., Media Coordinator with Buffalo Field Campaign. You can learn more about us and our work to protect America's last wild buffalo at buffalofieldcampaign.org. And you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Farmer, educator, maverick, demonstrator. I like that. Joel Salatin. You can learn more about his work. Be a student. Maybe become an intern. www.salatin, Salatin semester.com, and www.polyfacefarms.com. One of his books that I've been enjoying over the weekend is entitled, Folks, This Ain't Normal, A Farmer's Advice for Happier Hens, Healthy People for a Better World, and it's a Center Street 2011 release. One of the main things, Joel, that you basically are sharing and urging everybody to think about is the Jeffersonian farmer, and the foundation of this country was really based on households who farmed and grew their own food. And we have moved so far away from it that some people say, look, Joel and guys like that are just dreaming. He's like trying to reach back in time. Talk to us about your vision, though, that it's not about reaching back anywhere. It's about moving forward into very difficult, challenging climate change environments, limited resources, and issues of real food scarcity if we don't wake up.
Oh, well, that's quite a mouthful. But, in general, I'm definitely not reaching back. I'm reaching forward. The Jeffersonian intellectual agrarian was certainly a center, a foundational point for the founding of our country. We were an agrarian culture at one time, and I'm not trying to go back to an agrarian culture, but you can't pull up your roots and no civilization has ever been successful when it destroys its farmers or destroys its resource base. And the truth is, you can join Nature Conservancy, Sierra Club, Audubon Society, name any of these big environmental groups you want to, and you can argue how much they really affect the resource base. But if you really want to affect the resource base, you have to deal with the farmer,
right?
Because the farmers are the first. They're the first level stewards on 90% of the land base, our air, soil, and water, and eventually, no civilization is ever healthier than the health of its air, soil, and water. You can't eat Wall Street stocks.
Right.
They don't taste very good, and so if we don't preserve our air, soil, and water, then the civilization collapses. And of course, we've seen that throughout history many, many times. So I think that it behooves us all to answer the question: well, how can I make sure that there is regenerating, not just sticking our finger in the dike, but how can we grow more soil? How can we purify the air? How can we hydrate the landscape, not just hold things where they are, but how can we actually make our air, soil, and water even better for our grandchildren?
Mm-hmm.
That should be a vision for everybody.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I love the notion of planting fruit trees and nut trees all over the country. I mean, planting trees is an obvious answer, so why not plant trees that produce food? One of the things you write about, and a lot of people don't really give much thought to it because in this country we like cemetery-grade lawns, but grass is really a gift that most don't know anything about. And I love that you commented in your book that in the Laura Ingalls book days of Little House on the Prairie and those, if you could walk 12 feet from your house and be lost in the grass. And this summer I did a little experiment. 2 of our beds in our garden, I decided to just let go and see what happened. And what grew in it is grasses that are 5 and 6 feet tall.
Yes, amazing. Yes, that is one of the biggest misperceptions or misunderstandings when I talk about grass. Most people, their only association with grass is on a football field, a golf course, or a lawn.
Right.
And when I say grass, I'm thinking these primal grasses, the elephants on the Serengeti and these tall grasses that Laura Ingalls Wilder's family encountered, that were 8 and 10 feet tall, just massive. It behooves us all, I think, to appreciate that 500 years ago there was actually more nutrition produced in what is today the United States. There was more nutrition produced 500 years ago than there is today, even with gardens, hybrid seeds, John Deere tractors, and chemical fertilizers.
Mm-hmm.
There were millions, hundreds of millions of bison, over 1 million wolves that needed 25 pounds of meat a day. There were over 1 million beavers. 8% of the landscape was beaver ponds. Even in the arid Southwest, a massive beaver ponds. And so, when you think of this, if you go and look at early times, even as recent as 1900, I've done several speaking engagements in the Southwest, and it's amazing. You talk to the old people there, and you go on to a 100,000 acre ranch, for example, and in 1900, it supported 10 times as many cows as it does today, and there were, the grass was lush. I mean, I've been in Australia 9 times, and I just was with a guy that was negotiating purchasing a large ranch down there, and he actually, the ranch had been in his family since, the early 1800s, and so they had the ranch records from day one all the way up to today, and you could just see, 1840 it supported, 50,000 cows. By 1880 it was down to 30,000. By 1920 it was down to 20,000. Today it's down to less than 10,000, and they're having to drop to 5,000. That's a steady regression, and yet that landscape that landscape in its primal state with this choreography of these migratory flocks of birds, migratory flocks of herbivores, in its natural state, it was substantially more productive, and that's the same way it is here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why on our farm we come to every question or every problem, and we ask the question, well, what would nature do? What was this original design? How did this work? Before we had, and it's not going back to hoop skirts and hearth cooking, and it's not about going back, but it is about recognizing the templates and the patterns. So today we don't have wolves and we don't have bison, but we have cows and we don't have fire. If you start a fire, the little red engine comes out and puts it out, right? And so we don't have that either, which help to move and do amazing things ecologically. But we do have space-age electric fencing that's so portable, literally a thread that's invisible from 20 feet away can contain and control a herd of 5,000 cows. So we can actually with a steering wheel, it's like having a steering wheel, an accelerator, and a brake on a herd of pruners, of four-wheel drive sauerkraut vat pruners, moving across the landscape as precisely and perfectly as the lawnscape manager at a golf course moves a zero turn over the landscape. That has not been possible in human history. We're living in a time when that precision is possible.
And you're saying and can be put to our advantage in the sense of letting an herbivore roam in a particular pattern in order to help manage and restore the grasses, which is what the bison, when they would break up the soil with their hooves, you didn't have the runoff, you didn't have the loss, and all the other animals under them thrive. When you get rid of these top dog predators, as they're called, or apex guardians, the whole ecosystems come apart. So, but I want to come back to some other things you wrote, because there's so many areas that I'd like to touch on. And one of them that I have spent over, 15 years talking about, and I'm on the same side of the fence as you are, obviously, which is my opposition to GMOs and other transgenics. Talk to us about your own perspective and why this introduction into our food chain of this kind of industry and technology bodes so poorly for the future.
Yeah, well, the industry that says, well, GMOs are just an accelerated selection process like hybridization or just good seed stock management where you're selecting the best stock all the time. It's not at all. The GMOs require a violent interaction, a cannon essentially, into the actual DNA helix molecule, and it's at that level. And the truth is that nature has a lot of barriers to make sure that this kind of genetic manipulation can't happen. Like in the book, I say, in nature, there's the horse and the donkey, and they can mate and have offspring. It's called a mule. But the interesting thing about a mule is that it's sterile. It's almost like God says, okay, you can do this, but that's as far as you can go.
Exactly.
You're not going to mate a corn plant to a salmon, to a pig, to a tomato. As I say, if the sexual plumbing doesn't match up, it's probably there's probably something wrong with it. And so we in our completely ignorant minds, finite minds, we wander into the awesomeness and the mystery of this cosmos like a bunch of swashbuckling conquistadors, and beat around, and the next thing you know, we've got look at the hockey sticks of autism, the hockey sticks of diseases, gluten intolerance. When I was a child, when there was a church potluck or something at school and kids brought food, nobody asked about peanuts.
Right.
The term food allergy didn't even exist.
Right.
But we've had an absolute exponential proliferation of a vocabulary that didn't even exist just 30 years ago. And any thinking person would have to say, well, why? Why this unprecedented, brand new vocabulary that did not get invented until the last 30 years? Well, because other things were invented at the same time, and there's a direct result here. And so, one of my problems with GMOs, of course, I believe that they actually have problems. I can tell you that around here, dairy farmers, they don't want to grow corn silage from GMOs to feed their dairy cows because they're concerned about abortions.
Right.
That link is so well known that even conventional farmers talk about it, and so there's a tremendous amount of unspoken externalities going on with GMOs. But one of the worst is the fact that this promiscuous, by definition, they've got to breed, right, to germinate. So these promiscuous life forms do not respect boundaries. Even in aerial pesticide spraying, conscientious companies, and of course I disagree with that, but conscientious companies are extremely careful to stay within fence lines, to spray on mornings that there's no wind, very concerned about trespass and things like that. But with this GMO technology, it's inherently promiscuous, inherently does not respect property lines, and so, historically, if your animal or plant, if your bull came onto my property and tromped my flower bed, I could call the district attorney down at the county office and say, hey, this neighbor has a bull that's trampling my flower bed, and you could be taken into court and required to pay damages to me for property infringement. What we have today is Monsanto can send bulls, in this case, other beings, life forms that I don't want, onto my farm. Not only are they not liable, but the courts have ruled I have to pay them for the privilege of their bull trampling my flower bed.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. I used to call that corporatized terrorism. It really is. It's really modern-day bootlegging terrorism. When you talk about it, though, we have to take a break. I thought one of the beautiful things you made so clear for just an average reader is that it's not even just the where it begins, it's where it doesn't end, as you're starting to tell us, because the insects that become impervious, like in the soybean, the Roundup soybean, that has you inserted into it makings like Agent Orange, so devastating that it kills people. And then the insects that become impervious go on to breed, and then you have a new insect that never existed and never would have existed had it not been for the patent of the genetic engineering. And so it's getting to the point where not only do we know that children who have eaten it in test, humans and animals, others who eat these foods get sick when it's actually controlled. And as you pointed out with animal abortions, it's well known. And that animals, when given a choice, if you put out GMO grain and regular grain, they will never choose the GMO grain. But that these monopolies, these cartels, it's really fascism. I hate to say it, but it is when the central government supports privatized corporations. That's really what's running the direction of the food industry. And that's, I think, for some of us, just the biggest scary. That's just the biggie. For me, that's the biggest scary, because it means that the seed that once any farmer anywhere in the world could plant, they can no longer plant their own seed because they don't have it, and then they can't collect their seed for the following year. And people forget that if a cartel owns the seed, folks, nobody can plant nothing nowhere. Well, that's not great English, but you get the point. We'll be right back. Joel Salatin is our guest. I really encourage you to go to his website. It's the Salatin Semester, Salatin semester.com, and www.polyfacefarms.com, and of course our good friends at acresusa.com.
Hello, this is Don Weaver, co-author with John Hamaker of The Survival of Civilization, free at soilandhealth.org, and Regenerate the Earth, available from vibranthealthandwealth.com. Thanks for helping and for listening to Zohara Hieronimus at 21st Century Radio.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Don't forget, all of our guest shows are archived online for free at www.21stcenturyradio.com. And, of course, you can download them and listen to them at any time and share them with everybody. You know, Joel, one of the things that you speak to so eloquently about and have demonstrated works in your $2-point-some million business that I say because people think, oh, my God, he got to have loans. He must be indebted to the bank, none of which is true, that you have done this with a real appreciation of how to use the grazing herbivores, then how to move in the chickens, how basically the old peasant farm worked. And one of the things that I think Pollen is said to have been so excited by and what attracted him to you and why you were so featured in his work, The Omnivore's Dilemma, was that you refused to send food to locations not within a 4-hour drive of your farm, meaning if it was outside your local food shed. So let's use some of our remaining time to talk about how it is that everybody in our listening audience really can help be a part of the positive change in our food distribution, food growing, and food quality reality.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the most common I get. I've condensed it to three basic points. People ask, well, what can I do? So point number one is get in your kitchen. Much of the adulteration of our food system occurs in processing. Mm-hmm. And so, as Pollen says, shop the outside of the supermarket. Better yet, get raw, unprocessed material from your local farmer, and use your kitchen to preserve, package, prepare, foods. This is not, again, going backwards. Grandma would have given her eye teeth for the kind of timed bake and Cuisinarts and goodness, hot and cold running water on demand. Indoor plumbing, we have amazing technology today in our kitchen. So when I say get in your kitchen, it doesn't mean washboard, soup skirts, barefoot, pregnant, and standing in the kitchen all day. So get in your kitchen. That's number one. That gets you touching, feeling, tasting, seeing food.
Start making food rather than just buying prepared foods. Yeah, exactly.
Not just having a kitchen that only has a pair of nippers to zip through the plastic on the microwavable package. Number two is do something yourself. That can be as simple as a vermicomposting kit under your kitchen, to pots and even vertical. There are these wonderful vertical gardens now you can hang on your patio, hang outside a southern window, put a solarium on your house to grow winter mescaline mix and have passive solar coming into your house. Throw out the gerbil, the cat, the dog, and put in 2 chickens, and they'll eat your kitchen scraps and give you 2 eggs a day and be a great source of inspiration for your teenagers, because chickens wake up early in the morning, they're happy all day, turning trash into treasure, and they go to bed at the first darkening of the evening. So they're a perfect role model for teenagers. So do something yourself, just to appreciate the awesome and the mystery of life. And then the third thing is to take your recreational entertainment budget for 1 year, and I've met people that have done this. It's amazing. Whatever you're going to spend recreating and entertaining for the year, take that time and money budget and spend it finding your food treasures in your community. These are farms. There's an entire subculture of integrity, regenerative farms in every community now.
Yes, there are. It's wonderful to watch this next generation, the boomers' children, as I say, have come of age. They're in their early 30s and mid-30s. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. Some of them are very small, but I will tell you, many of them are just 5, 6, 7 customers away from a tipping point where they can quit their hour-round commute and actually come back to the farm full time.
Mm-hmm.
And for you to be able to enable these visionary, dreaming part-timers to be able to devote full attention, I mean, you become like a patron saint.
Yeah, even if it's just, joining a local CSA and making sure you support a farmers to be able to plant the food you're going to eat. We have a new a butcher, John Brown's Butchery here in my county, where they get their meat from a farm and the whole animal is brought to them and they use the whole animal. Of course, they're pasture fed. And I think that's what people say. If you're not a vegetarian and you want to eat meat, spend the money to get grass-fed meat.
Yes, that's right. So, when I'm talking about, know your local farmer, what I mean is, go visit farms, and you will quickly gain a skill set of being able to determine who's the charlatan and who's the real deal.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of them have pick your own, so you can actually go on the farms and get some produce.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. But I feel the push every time I do this. I feel the pushback through. I don't have the time.
Yeah.
I don't have the whatever. And that's why I say, look, take your budget of entertainment and recreation for the year and put 1 year, and you won't ever have to do it again, because then you'll have your entire network of support group.
And when you also say that the wonderful farmers markets that we have in our urban communities are farmers who aren't growing most of the time in the cities, they're coming into the cities with their produce. You can also learn what's so close to our cities.
Sure. And the truth is that a lot of people want something different to happen. Well, something different is not going to happen until people act differently.
Right.
Where we are today in our food culture, our health culture, our economic culture, where we are is the manifestation of billions and billions of decisions that people have made. And where we will be in 20 years will also be a manifestation of of the decisions people make between now and then, and the decision to actually make a connection with your ecological umbilical. Those decisions are going to create the world that your children will inherit, and that's one of the reasons why here at Polyface on our little bags, our little slogan is healing the planet, healing the land one bite at a time, because that's the land is actually going to look like the bites of food that you eat. That, over time, that's what's going to happen.
When you look at both the challenges we face and the opportunities of really rethinking, I mean, to me, it's such an extraordinary time in that way that, we can go one direction and it's not going to turn out so well, and we can go another direction and it's really going to be good. For those that sit on the fence, Joel, who say, I'm not, I always hear when I say to people, you really must eat organic if you do nothing else, particularly people who juice, and they're juicing these chemicalized pesticide food products, getting more chemicals and pesticides into their body by juicing than if they were just eating foods. So I always tell them organic, well, I can't afford it. That's what they say.
Well, my first question when anybody says that is I grab them by the hand and say, okay, take me to your house. We're going to go to your house right now, and I'm sure here's what we're not going to find. We're not going to find Starbucks coffee cups. We're not going to find takeout DiGiorno's frozen pizza. That's very, very expensive. We're not going to find lottery tickets. We're not going to find soda, alcohol, golf clubs, widescreen flat TVs.
Right, expensive shoes, expensive clothes, et cetera, et cetera. Right.
Designer jeans with holes already in the knees.
Right.
That's and the truth is that if you really want something, you have to prioritize to get it. And I realize there are certainly people financially where what we're talking about is a stretch, and I absolutely, we need to appreciate that. But so often the conversation gets derailed into that without confronting the soccer mom who has no problem at all taking her 6-year-old 3 hours in a traveling soccer program, and then says, well, I can't spend an extra 30 cents on really pastured eggs that will really feed me, or I can't, I'm not willing to spend an extra $2,000 a year feeding my family the highest quality stuff. I mean, we generally, as a society, we wouldn't think about putting fuel as impure as the food we put in our bodies. We wouldn't begin to think of putting that kind of impure fuel in our Honda, our SUV, our automobile.
Yeah.
But we have no problem at all putting completely garbage-tainted fuel into our own bodies. It's a funny stretch.
We're almost out of time, and I just want to tell you that you've done so much good for so many thousands and thousands, if not millions, of people in the long run who have watched you as a example of what is possible. It's not like you're speaking theory; you're speaking lived proof, and that's not something you always find in the world. So I want to thank you and your family and your ancestors and your children who continue for doing this, and to close with what you recommend, which is all of this is about our own responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for our land and our future. And so I want to encourage our audience to follow up with you. Go to the salatinsemester.com. That's www.salatin, SALATIN semester.com, www.polyfacefarms.com, acresusa.com, and Folks, This Ain't Normal by Joel Salatin. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus, and remember, we do need more love in the world.